Hello, and welcome to the Truthwards podcast, where we discuss the details of natural solutions for chronic health conditions. I'm Natalie Kasana, and I'm so happy and grateful that you are listening. I hope you will enjoy it or get something useful out of this series. In this episode, you'll hear about Michelle's experience healing eczema naturally and all the details of what worked and what didn't work for her in the end. I'd like to start by noting that the views and opinions shared during this podcast are my own and do not reflect the views of my employer or any affiliated organizations. That equally applies to any guests that may appear on the podcast as well. Additionally, because we will be talking about health topics, I want to make clear that I am not a licensed healthcare professional, and any advice shared on this podcast is not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice, nor a guarantee that the same results would be seen by anyone else. I would always encourage anyone to seek the opinion of a healthcare provider before trying any possible healing paths. It is important to establish a clinical diagnosis and assess possible risks or interference with current medications. Welcome, Michelle. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. Thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and for being willing to share the details of your story. I really can't wait to hear it.
I'm so excited to be here. I love your mission. I'm so excited to share my story and hope that it helps other people.
Thank you. And for our listeners, a little background. I first was introduced to Michelle when I came across her website and her coaching profile on Instagram. And I was so impressed with the vast amount of knowledge that she's collected and shared there. And also with the really positive feedback that she's gotten from the people that she's coached and that she's shared information with. And Michelle, I'm so interested in what your healing story was and what ended up working for you, but also really curious what actually ended up working when you were working with all these people, which, as we discussed, you've worked with and coached people for 8 years now, which is really impressive. I can only imagine how your perspective has changed and evolved over time. And I'm just so curious to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to share. I feel like there's a lot of insights that I've learned over the last 8 years that I can definitely bring to the table, because what I experienced in my journey is not what all of my clients experienced at all. And I think the longer I did it, the more variables and factors I realized went into it.
So to start, if you could share a little bit about what were the symptoms at a high level that you experienced with your own eczema, and what type of solution ended up being the most effective for you?
Yeah, if we think about it from high level, because obviously all of us have dealt with so much with eczema, we could get so into the nitty gritty, but high level, I'd say I experienced my eczema was mostly in my skin folds growing up and when I had my massive flare as an adult at 22. And I was extremely itchy, deep nerve pain itch. It would ooze and it disrupted so much, so much could trigger it that it was getting to my mental health. And, it was hard. But a high level of how I resolved it, I kind of always say it's mind, body, spirit together. And for me, a lot was diet related, especially at that original flare that I had at 22. It was a lot about shifting my diet, but ultimately it was making lifestyle changes. And I had to shift basically my entire lifestyle to live a different way to prevent and heal eczema.
Wow, I could definitely resonate with that, and I can't wait to hear more about the details. So in the end, how much of a recovery did you experience? Let's say percentage-wise, were you able to completely resolve your symptoms, or, was it like a percentage reduction?
So as of today, I have no flares on my entire body, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Eczema comes and goes.
Yes.
And with it being so tied into mindset and lifestyle, I am not perfect all the time. And so every single year, so I'm 30 now and I was 22 when my big flare came up. It's been 8 years on my specific healing journey. And every single year it reduced in severity. And so, yes, when I was 22, I did reverse my pretty bad flares in 3 months, which was really quick amount of time. But those came back after a couple of months or after my lifestyle shifted backwards to my old habits. But it resolved quickly. And I'll say to this day, if I have a flare, I can resolve it within a couple of months. Like it depends on the severity of it, but if it's very mild, I can get rid of it in a week. If it's a little bit more severe, it might take a month or two, but yeah, thankfully I have a pretty short timeline.
That's terrific. And that actually is very similar to my own experience. So, regarding your background or your childhood or anything that happened in your life, is there anything that you think might be relevant or just interesting and informative that has any relation to what you think might have, contributed to your eczema experience, let's say?
I think about this all the time, especially when I meet other people and I ask about their histories. I like pry into certain questions because I think there's certain things that are connected. And one of those things I think about is what happened in the womb. So, like, if we go all the way back to the beginning of my life,
Mm-hmm.
did my mother have to take antibiotics? And I didn't find out until like years later when I was learning about the microbiome and all of that. And I asked my mom, I was like, can you remember taking antibiotics when you were pregnant? And funny enough, she had a UTI about a month before I was born, had to take her round of antibiotics. Not only that, she ended up having a C-section. So, with those two factors, I feel like my immune system didn't get off on the right foot. And even with my mom's diet that she had while she was pregnant, like all of those can contribute towards a healthy, regulated immune system, a healthy, regulated gut. And I didn't really get born into this world with the with the best immune system, with the best gut. And I had eczema really young, off and on. It wasn't as severe as I've seen other children have to go through, thank goodness. But that, and then on top of that, I was a very picky eater, which I think also was a result of my gut microbiome. So the relationship between what my gut was craving and what I wanted to eat. So I ate, I grew up eating chicken nuggets, mac and cheese. Like my entire diet was like chocolate and cheese, pretty much.
That so many people can relate to. Kids are picky eaters. Like, it's challenging.
Yeah. So I think all of that didn't really set me up the best. And I looking back now, had a lot of childhood trauma, and that obviously plays, I think, more of an effect as an adult. And of course, I'm sure it did as a kid, but I can't really think back to those times. I did have anxiety. I wonder how much that contributed towards my childhood eczema, but I definitely know healing that as an adult has played a role in, my ability to not have eczema at this point.
Fascinating. And that really makes a lot of sense. That combination of both diet, gut health, and mental health seems to be a really common thread across eczema stories in varying degrees for different people based on their background. And, it's something that's so hard for a lot of women to avoid because, when they do those strep tests, some women have to have those rounds of antibiotics. And there's so many things that can happen in the course of your pregnancy. It's really hard to maybe give your child the ideal birth and pregnancy that you'd ideally want. And I know you and I can both relate because we have kids. So like, I'm really curious from your experience also how you think those things can be overcome because life happens, right? So then once things happen, what can you do or what have you done that maybe has improved your immunity or your gut health or things like that?
Yeah, I don't think you're doomed. Like, obviously, I have.
That's the point of this podcast. It's like we're all doomed to a certain extent, right? Like we've all gone through life experiences that we can't help. And then how can we recover from that and figure out ways to move forward?
Right. I am 8, almost 9 months pregnant. I don't have a single spot of eczema on my body. And I've recovered from a lot of things. And so, yeah, maybe my mom had to take antibiotics, but that didn't mean that my entire life was now this trap of chronic health conditions. And not
Yep.
only did I have eczema growing up, I also was sick all the time. I had a lot of sinus issues. Like I had a very nasally voice. I always had sinus congestion. And then every single sickness that another person had, if they were around me, it was guaranteed that I would have that. That has all resolved as well as I've gone on my journey.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I even had a period of time, it was, this is such a funny thing, but when I was 22, I had started taking Zyrtec, an allergy medication, because I was having allergy attacks to whatever, I mean, goodness knows what I was allergic to, but if it was cats or dust or whatever, and I would sit there and I would sneeze and sneeze and sneeze and my nose would run. And it was almost like I was sick with a cold, but it was just allergies. That's how severe they would get. And so I started taking the allergy medication and I thought to myself, when I committed to a lifestyle change to heal my eczema, I was like, why don't I just stop taking the Zyrtec and see what happens? And I never needed it ever again.
Wow. Wow. So whatever changes you made for diet and lifestyle also really was able to improve your allergies as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of already explained a little bit about your symptoms, but when did your eczema start? You said like when you were a young child, and then how did it kind of evolve or progress over time? And along with that, what things did you try along the way that may have been not so natural, or whatever you tried that was natural and maybe didn't work at all?
Yeah, so let's go into the deep dive, right?
Yes, the deep dive.
So I have a couple of memories of me as a kid. My eczema was always come and go, come and go. Because I've coached people for 8 years, I have seen so many common patterns with people. My eczema tended to come in the fall, go away in the spring, come in the fall, go away in the spring. So I never really had flares in the summer. They would always start in the fall, through the winter, and then go away. And I had a lot of issues with my hands growing up. I remember they would always crack and bleed. That was something that I didn't realize was eczema, and I don't think my parents put two and two together because I did have traditional flares as a kid. Like I had the insides of my elbows, I had it on my collarbone, I had the typical areas, but I don't think we knew that it was eczema actually plaguing my poor hands almost every single fall. And I just remember how awful that was. And my parents at the time, this was the 90s, and the treatments were what? Steroids. There wasn't a whole lot available, or like the lotions or whatever. And I remember my parents were just so confused. They thought that when the oak trees were blooming in the fall or something, that it was triggering my hands to have reactions. Like they just didn't know. You know,
Yeah.
you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And I
Mm-hmm.
also remember when I was in middle school, for some reason, my flares on my legs were really bad. So I had those coin-shaped flares all over my legs that would ooze. And so many people listening, if they've had eczema and it's severe enough, it would ooze, stick to my sheets. You wake up in the morning, you have to peel it off. It starts bleeding and oozing again. Horrible experience. And I remember wearing jeans. We wore skinny jeans, and I would basically have to like pry it off of my legs from all of the oozing that had stuck to the jeans. And it was a terrible experience. And I remember in the top drawer of my nightstand having a tube of steroids that I like was my saving grace. Like I like loved that tube. It was silver and aqua colored. And I just remember it being in there and being like, oh, that's my saving grace right there.
Yep.
And we were advised at that time to slather my legs in steroids and then wrap them in saran wrap while I slept because it would make it more effective. Luckily, as a kid, I had the ability to not go through topical steroid withdrawal. So I didn't actually withdraw from that. It did ended up working and that resolved. This is another common theme I've heard from a lot of people, but the eczema tends to go not fully dormant, but can chill out for people during high school and college. And that is such a common theme. And for it to then flare back up at 22, I hear it all the time. It's a very weird,
Interesting.
similar timeline that I have heard. So when I was in high school and college, maybe I would get like a quarter-sized flare on the back of my legs. It would go away. It was like not chronic condition, right? But like, you know, those people who have eczema and they're like, oh yeah, I just put moisturizer on it. It just went away.
Yep.
So that was kind of that stage of my life where it was just like, don't have to really think about it. Little itchy behind my knees, whatever. And then, yeah, hit 22, it completely blew up. It was scary. It went from being like some patches on the insides of my elbows. And after doing deep diving and really looking at what the timeline looked like, I had those patches that were like, they would come and go for a couple of months. And then for some reason, from the month of November to December, it started spreading up both of my arms at a really rapid pace. It was extremely painful. I had such sensitive nerves at the time, like the nerve pain or the sensitivity my skin had, anything could trigger it. Whether I was trying to take off a shirt, it would be the itchiest thing I've ever felt in my life. And it was really scary how quickly it was erupting. And, you know, my parents were like, they were so worried about me. And they were like, aren't you going to go? Like, can you go to the dermatologist? When I was in college, I started my healthy journey where I got really into nutrition. And so I wanted to heal it naturally. I went on YouTube and I saw other people's stories and I was like, well, you know, like people were explaining topical steroid withdrawal. They're like, these steroids don't really help. They're Band-Aid solutions. And at that point in my life, I was not, it just wasn't like in my moral makeup at the time to do anything that was a Band-Aid solution. So I got really stubborn and I was like, I'm going to do anything that I need to do to get rid of this. Like, no, mom, I can't go to the dermatologist. And she's like, is there anybody that you can see? And at the time, it was starting to become clear that your gut was involved, your immune system was involved. I was like, maybe I can go see like an immunologist. I don't know. I felt like I was grasping at straws. Um, and when you asked, you know, what worked, what didn't work, at that time I had gone to a drugstore and I grabbed basically every lotion that had the word eczema on it, and they all burned so bad.
Really?
They hurt so bad. I was like, I can't use this. So I basically had to sit there and like formulate my own weird concoction, which ended up being shea butter mixed with olive oil with geranium essential oil, lavender essential oil. To this day, the smell of geranium reminds me of eczema.
Oh my God. Shea butter also was the most soothing thing for me. I had one question on what you were saying before when you said that it flared up in the fall and then went away in the spring. Did you think somehow that maybe it was associated with the seasons? Because I've heard so many people say, oh, it's just like seasonal, like your skin gets dry in the winter. I'm like, it's way more than that. And like, I'm curious because yours exactly aligned with that seasonal pattern, if that's something that you or your parents may have thought, at least initially.
So we couldn't really figure out, like my parents were like, oh, it's the mushrooms blooming, it's the trees. I don't know. They had no idea. But after
Fair.
hearing that pattern so many times with other people, it's a huge combination of things. And that's kind of the same thing with why people with eczema struggle so much with sleep, is because sleep and eczema, there's such a huge amount of factors that go into why we flare so badly at night. But the flares that are happening when, you know, obviously in the northern hemisphere, in the fall, it's starting to get cold, right? But not only that, we have certain holidays, we have certain habits. The sun is now setting sooner. We're not going outside. We're starting to eat sugar way more, starting to eat more carbs. There's just so many tiny factors. Like, yes, the winter air might be dry, but that's such a tiny piece of the whole thing. It's usually between Thanksgiving and Christmas that people have the worst time. It's usually when they flare the most, and it's because what are you doing for the entire month of November and December? It's you're with family getting stressed out, you're inside,
Mm-hmm.
time just changed. I mean, there's like 1,000 different factors that go into it. So looking back on it now, I'm like, okay, I mean, it makes sense.
Absolutely. That actually really aligns with my experience, and I always didn't understand it either. I said it's not the winter, it's something else, but what you're saying makes total sense.
Yeah. And I just want to say, if somebody's listening out there and they're like, it's my climate. It's because I live in this certain climate that I have eczema. I will promise you that is not true. I have talked to everyone, like I've talked to people from all around the world who have
Wow.
lived in different climates and they blame their climate.
Mm-hmm.
There is not a pattern. People have said, it's because I live somewhere that's so humid. It's because I live somewhere that's so dry. It's because I live somewhere that's so hot. It's because I live somewhere that's so cold. It's like, that's not a factor. It's a factor, a teeny bit, it plays
Mm-hmm.
into
Mm-hmm.
things a little bit, but that is not the reason why you have flares. It's not the climate. Otherwise, I wouldn't have heard everything under the sun.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And really good to hear from someone who has talked to people all over the world. That's a really helpful perspective. So you were saying how at the peak of your symptoms, it started to go up your arms. And what was the worst point in time for you? And what was it like for you at that time?
For years, I couldn't even address those memories because it was so traumatic. But I remember it was my dad's birthday, December 15th. We went to my grandma's house. She had made a cheesecake. We had dinner together, sat down, ate the cheesecake, got home. I was in one of the worst amount of pain of my entire life. I mean, cheesecake is all of the things that would trigger a flare, from sugar to gluten to dairy, whatever it was that really triggered those flares. It was so painful. I just didn't even know what to do with myself. And at that time, I didn't have all of the tools that I would soon have, like my supplements, my diet regimens. I didn't have that at that time. I didn't even have my moisturizer regimen that would cause it to like be soothed a little bit. I had nothing. And I was just sitting there in pure agony, and my skin was like bright red. It
Oh
was
my
just
God.
oh. And it was so exhausting to experience that massive flare up like that. And then when you finally it calms down a little bit, you're like, I just feel so bad right now.
Oh my gosh. Now, how did those flares occur for you? Was it like a few hours? It would be really intense and then it would fade away?
Yeah, when I would call them itch attacks. They would happen either immediately, like pretty immediate after eating, up to like an hour. So in that case, it was about 30 minutes to an hour after I had eaten the cheesecake. We had went back home to my parents' house and it just blew up, and it was so scary. So yeah, for me, they would be itch attacks where I have this other instance and story where I was living in Philadelphia at the time, and I drove to this little town, and it said, like this coffee shop had this gluten-free, dairy-free brownie. And I was like, great. I've heard gluten is so bad for eczema. This should be just fine. Ate the brownie. Within 5 minutes, was literally screaming in agony in the car because I had an itch attack from most likely the sugar that was still present in the brownie that I was reacting to.
Oh
And
my God.
it would last, I would say, pretty intensely for 30 minutes, and then it would start to die down. And then later, again, I had my regimen and I could get it to calm down a lot faster.
Wow. That is scary. That is intense. So, based on this experience, then how did you figure out and what was the solution you ended up figuring out first? Or how did you even go about finding that solution or those solutions that ended up working for you?
Yeah, so I went to YouTube, and there were these two girls that followed the paleo diet, and one of them had eczema, and she was sharing her personal story, and that was really helpful, and that kind of got me thinking down the lines of like, okay, maybe it's gluten, maybe it's dairy, whatever. And then from there, I just kept trying to find more people's stories who healed naturally. Nowadays, it's very easy to find that information online. Back then, there weren't a lot of people talking about specifically healing eczema naturally. One of my saving graces was Karen Fisher's book. She has a book, and I think she has a cookbook out now, but she was talking about salicylates. Her book talks about like oxalates, histamines, salicylates, all sorts of things. And I found that, and I was able to kind of make the connection between what foods were flaring my skin and what that meant. And so through her book, I was able to target that I had a severe salicylate intolerance. What exactly did that mean? It meant that I had an overworked liver, so non-alcoholic fatty liver. And so slowly the pieces started coming to me. It was, okay, it's my gut health. It's my liver. And so then I started trying to figure out, well, how am I going to reverse this? Because no shade to Karen Fisher and her regimens, but just avoiding and eliminating was going really slow for me. So I was down to a point where I could only eat 10 foods without reacting because I could pinpoint how foods affected me. Like I had a really strong relationship between I ate this, I had a reaction, and I could see that really easily. So I took out salicylates and I, again, was down to like 10 foods.
What key foods do salicylates, are they generally the most prominent in? And what were those 10 foods you could actually eat? Was it the typical wheat dairy or was it other things?
So salicylates are so interesting. I don't meet a ton of people with eczema that have a salicylate intolerance. It's more so people are very sensitive to histamines. So top of mind, I could tell you all the histamine foods, but trying to think back to the foods that were really high in salicylates, one of the foods that I always have people test is red bell peppers. They're high in salicylates, but low in histamine. So if you tolerate them, it's most likely you don't have like a pretty bad salicylate issue. So the 10 foods, and what's so interesting to me now is I truly, truly, truly did not have a histamine intolerance at that time, which is very curious to me because now I meet people with eczema and it's like 9 out of 10 people have an issue with histamines. But my healing foods included things like bananas, which are known to be really high in histamine, and papaya, which is also, not only are those two high in histamine, they're histamine liberators. So this is kind of theoretical because there's not enough research to prove histamine liberators, but theoretically, though, there's certain foods that will cause your mast cells to release more histamine. When we think about histamine intolerance, it's usually you don't have enough DAO enzymes in your gut to break down histamine. But with histamine liberating foods, they're foods that trigger the immune system basically to release the histamines. It's not just isolated to the gut. So anyway, I was eating oats, I was eating lentils, I was eating tuna, canned tuna, bananas. I remember my meal prep at that time was so weird. And like something that a lot of people really struggle with when they do elimination diets is, what do I do about breakfast? Because a lot of people really struggle with eggs and pancakes. That's like a traditional thing to eat for breakfast. I always tell them in my own experience, I had to throw the idea of breakfast out the window. I was eating salmon for breakfast. I did whatever it took to heal. I would literally eat beans, salmon with flax oil and salt for breakfast because that's what I needed to do to get my body to heal. And I needed to heal faster. I didn't like the rate that I was healing just eliminating foods. And that's when I went on a mission to find foods that would heal my body faster. So I did a lot of bone broth to heal my gut. I did flax oil, which is high in omega-3. I started taking milk thistle to help my liver. I just was going to do anything to heal my liver and my gut faster. And clearly it worked because I was able to reverse it so fast.
That's incredible. So you were saying earlier that it took you about 3 months to heal that worst flare, and that's with these diet changes that you made, correct?
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
it was heavily supplement related and heavily diet related. It wasn't until I flared a year later that I started addressing stress because I noticed the relationship between stress and the flare. But at that time, it was elimination diet, healing foods, and supplements. My holy grails of supplements at that time was glycine, omega-3, and milk thistle. Those were like, I kept them on me at all times because if I would have an itch attack, I would take them and it would resolve it pretty quickly.
Really? So if you had an itch attack, you would take these supplements and it would really help to calm those symptoms.
Yes, I remember I finally had my regimen. I was hanging out with family. We went to go eat. Something about what I ate didn't quite sit right. When I got home, I started having an itch attack. And I remember laying down, I had a glass of water, and I took all of my supplements. And that itch attack only lasted maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So it cut down the big flare very, very quickly. And this isn't to say this is my recommendation now, because I have completely different recommendations now than then, but that was what worked specifically for me at that time.
Wow. So that flare kind of calmed down in about 3 months. And did it completely go away or just like, was a much more manageable at that time?
It completely went away, and I had about a month or two where it was gone. I was left with some hypopigmentation, where
Mm-hmm.
the skin was much lighter than my natural skin tone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That resolved on its own, but it did actually go away. Then I started reintroducing foods and I had small flares pop up and you know, it wasn't as smooth sailing after that, but I did go from giant flare taking over my arms to it's like 90% gone. Yeah, and then after that, I made mistakes. Lots and lots and lots of mistakes for many years.
Amazing that it went away that much. And then can you talk a little bit about how those recurrences happened and what made you start to think, shifting towards the stress element as opposed to just saying, I have to just be really strict with my diet and just keep taking these supplements? What made you think that maybe there's something else to it?
Yeah. Just lots and lots of trial and error and
Yeah.
watching what happened. Like, I was always somebody who craved food. Like, I always used food as comfort. And I think that's what even led up to that big flare when I was 22. I was comfort eating, and
Mm-hmm.
it would involve Ben and Jerry's and bagels and fun things.
Understandably.
And so like my mindset was I wanted to go back to eating some of the things that I used to eat or at least healthier alternatives. And I've always had the biggest sweet tooth. And so it was almost always my sweet tooth that would start the whole cycle again. But a year after the flare that I had at 22, I had a pretty bad flare again. And yeah, I had sugar. I went to New York City and I went to Little Italy and I ate a cannoli and I ate a lobster tail that was like filled with cream, and that really, my eczema really didn't like that. But it was around that time that had me thinking, well, why did this flare pop up in the first place? I've been really stressed and I really need to sit down and address what's going on, or I'm just going to keep flaring. And so it was kind of in that moment where I started my, I guess, self-therapy journey, because that's what I did first, is I kind of started with self-therapy, self-development books, YouTube videos, trying to uncover some of the things that were going on inside of me, find the patterns with them. It could be so clear for me because in moments where I would be very angry or moments that I would get really stressed out, I could feel it in my skin. And so I was like, I can't keep having the flares like this.
Interesting. So you were so sensitive to this is happening and now I feel this in my skin. It like was almost immediate for you. So you could tell that the stress was triggering the way like some of those diet things might have triggered your eczema as well.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
really useful actually in trying to figure out like I feel like for me it was always more like drawn out. Like it was a day later. So I'd be like, what did I eat yesterday? You know? So that's really actually helpful and useful that it was kind of immediate.
I felt the same way. That's why I've always stuck with the name Empowered Eczema, because I felt so empowered by my journey in so many different ways. I thought it was so cool that my body was able to tell me that something was wrong so quickly. Like I had that immediate feedback. But eczema in general, I think is cool because, some people have these underlying conditions that they don't know about.
Fully agree. Yep.
And, when you have eczema, your body's like, hey, something's wrong. You need to fix it.
It's like a litmus test. It's like it's right there. It either worked or it didn't work. It's very obvious.
Exactly. So I think that part of it is kind of cool. And I also had this feeling of like, oh my God, I'm not a victim of my circumstances. And I guess my mindset at the time was like, you grow up kind of having a fear of cancer. And I thought to myself, like, oh, if you get cancer, you're just a victim of it. And after experiencing the ability to heal my eczema and actually getting control of my body, it really empowered me to be like, oh, my body and I can work together. I'm not just like a victim of this thing that could just happen to me. So that part was really, really empowering for me.
I love that perspective. I could really relate to that too, because I remember feeling so scared about like, what if you just get cancer? I remember having that same feeling as a kid. And now there's so many stories of people out there who are tackling their cancer head on with a combination of conventional and diet, natural health related solutions. And it really is about working with your body. And our bodies are so powerful to heal. And like you said, eczema is such a great example because you can really test out what works and what doesn't.
And it's nice to have that perspective too, because when you start diving on social media, it's just so dark for people with eczema, especially people going through topical steroid withdrawal, because it's so much more severe. You can really get drawn into this victim mentality, feeling really down. It gets really dark because it affects the way you feel confident about yourself or not. It's just a huge thing. So to have the perspective of, this can actually be empowering, I think is refreshing.
Absolutely. And now, if you think to your life today, how does everything that you learned continue to play out and has your perspective kind of changed on your own eczema? And like, for example, are you still strict with your diet or how do you, manage upcoming stresses that happen in your life or things like that?
I'm like, do you have the next 2 hours?
I know.
I feel like my entire life has changed in a very positive direction that allows me to not have to deal with flares. I feel very confident that I am not a victim of my flares. And like, for example, when you're pregnant, it's a very sensitive time. When you're postpartum, it's a very sensitive time. I feel like I've had full control over whether or not I do have eczema. And I think a lot of it has to do with it's such a cycle, I feel, between your mindset and your habits. I feel like if I narrowed it really down to a couple of things, it is having a healthy mindset and having healthy habits because your body is a culmination of the habits that you have. And so I make sure that the habits that I have are leading me towards low inflammation. I've been doing this so long, I can basically feel the impact of anything on my body. Like whether it's I take a walk, okay, how do I feel after? Yeah, that was really good. Or no, it was a little too hot out. Like I have this really sensitive meter on things that are good for me and things that are not. And so I kind of live my lifestyle. One of my theories that I teach is eating and living by certain ratios. So I call it my 70-30 rule, where 70% of the time you're eating and doing things that are healing. And then 30% of the time you're being a normal person in society, eating pizza and, getting stressed out. But those ratios change as factors change in your life. So the more stressed I get, the tighter I have to be on my diet. So when people are on vacation, a lot of times they're like, oh, do I need to move to this place? Because when I went on vacation there, like my flares went away. And I'm like, no, no. It's the lack of stress. It's the ability to relax. It's the nervous system regulation. It's getting out of the environment of your home where your mind is really loud. And so with my current lifestyle, when I get stressed, I'll move to like a 90-10. Or right now, I'm in my third trimester, I'm at a 90-10. So I'm trying to make sure I'm not causing any flares that lead to postpartum flares and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. So am I still strict on my diet? Yes, but I think it's because I know too much now. And what I mean by that is like when you learn the relationship between ingredients and what it does to the inside of your body, and then when you learn how powerful a whole food is, not the store, but the
Yes.
actual food itself, and you realize, oh wow, like when I eat salmon, like I can control how much inflammation's in my body. And that's amazing. And there's so many micronutrients in there. Like I can support my joints this way. I can prevent this or whatever. And so, it's like I am not somebody who can like read a label and willingly eat certain things just because I know the impact on my body. So
Yes.
it's really, I'm, I live a different lifestyle now. Like I'm much slower. I'm much more intentional about the things that I'm doing. I am not somebody who is overdoing it, who's running around anymore. My nervous system plays a huge role into my skin. So I have to do things that regulate my nervous system. I have to be really sensitive and kind to myself on a daily basis to make sure I'm not falling into old habits. So again, it's now to this day, it's like my habits are everything, really.
That's so wise. And I'm really curious. In the beginning, it might have felt hard to give up, let's say, ice cream or bagels or whatever that you really liked. But over time, as you got really in touch with your body, really in tune with how it made you feel, I'm curious if your love for some of those foods has changed and maybe does it not feel as hard anymore or as restrictive? And does it actually feel like you want to live that way or follow that diet because you like how you feel? I'm curious if your perspective on your diet has changed or if it still feels like restrictive to you.
It feels exactly the way you described it, where it just feels too good to live this way that when I do something else, I can feel it and it just doesn't feel as good. I feel like over the years, right, I went from eating Ben and Jerry's ice cream then to like frozen bananas blended
Mm-hmm.
to like, there I've made so many different shifts along the way because again, I had a sweet tooth. And so I always tried to find my loopholes to still get that sweet treat in. And after a long time of doing that, you feel so different eating something sweetened with dates, for example, than sugar. When I consume sugar, I can feel it on my teeth. I can feel it inflaming my body. I just don't like the way that that feels. And I think when you get to a point where you know how it feels to not feel bad, you don't want to go back.
Yes, it's like the good association you had with those things is no longer there because of the bad feelings that it creates, and you know how good you can feel. So it doesn't feel like torture to avoid some of those things. And like you said, you come up with good replacements like dates and banana and other sweeteners. I can so relate to everything you're saying. What does your diet look like now when you end up doing like a 90-10 balance like you're doing these days, let's say?
Well, so as your body heals, what falls into, I kind of say like the things that your body loves and the things that your body doesn't love. So as your body heals, right? So like I was only able to eat 10 things back in the day. That has grown so, so, so much. So now, for example, what fits into my 90 could be things like eggs, could be dairy. And I eat those things and I feel fantastic. Like I have yogurt as part of my 90. I have eggs every single day as part of my 90. What fits into my 10, it's not just processed foods or fast food. It's also foods that my body just struggles to process for some reason. So chocolate, I don't know what it is. If it has cocoa or cacao, my body hates it. And so that fits into my 10. So when I'm like going about my life, I'm eating, my 90 looks like some eggs with cheese for breakfast. I'll do a yogurt bowl. I eat ground beef. I eat salmon, all of those things. And then when I want a treat, that 10 would look like, okay, my husband and I are going to go out. I don't love sugar. I think my body's still very sensitive to too much sugar. It doesn't matter if it's with honey, maple syrup, or actual sugar. Anything that's overly sweet and raises my blood sugar too much, it really does cause a lot of inflammation. So my 10 would be, oh, let's go get these gluten-free pancakes that have maple syrup on them. That still has to fit into my 10 just based on my individual body. Which leads me to like, how have I really gotten to this ability to listen to my body so well? I teach my clients and people that they have to track. You only have to do it for a short amount of time and then you get into the habit. So like I created a spreadsheet online that's just this massive tracker, and you input the things that you ate, how they made you feel, and it doesn't have to be eczema related. How it makes you feel could be lethargic, could be a headache, could be, whatever. And then you're also writing down your bowel movements, your sleep, your stress. And in doing that on a daily basis, you start to create those connections. So it's just a pattern recognition thing. And using a tracker can be a really good way to train yourself into the pattern recognition.
Fascinating. That makes a lot of sense. I'd love to understand a little bit about what you have learned and how your perspective has changed as far as there being one right or set way to heal eczema that may have worked with you, and kind of the variety of scenarios you've come across in working with clients and how that's maybe changed or altered your perspective.
There's things that sit pretty similarly across the board. And then there's so many things that don't. And with our bodies being this massive system, we have so many different organs, and everyone's body is so different. And the more severe eczema gets, and then leading into when you start mixing medications in with it. So, for example, topical steroid withdrawal, or somebody is coming off of Protopic or Rinvoq, like a JAK inhibitor, the more severe it gets, the more complicated it gets, because there's so many more body systems that are getting impacted. So if I sat here and I'm like, I'm only going to take clients with moderate eczema, the patterns would be a lot more similar. And I could have a more generalized approach of, okay, we're going to eat this way and it's going to pretty much work for everyone. But the more severe it gets, it's now we're messing with the adrenal system. Oh, this person actually has mast cell activation syndrome. Oh, on top of that, there's a fungal infection. Oh, it just gets so complicated. Or, oh, the gallbladder isn't creating enough this, or, there's not enough enzymes. So when I was going through it, I guess I would probably categorize myself as having moderate eczema. Those things and the supplements that generally work, yeah, that can be applied for a lot of people with like moderate to mild eczema. But the people who are really looking for help have chronic eczema. And when you get into the chronic eczema, I mean, it's just too complicated. Like there's just so many factors. There are things across the board that are kind of similar as far as like avoiding certain toxic chemicals that are found in certain lotions or detergents or stuff like that. A lot of people really benefit from the shea butter or from tallow. Or, see, this is where we start to get more complicated, is when you use the steroids, your skin thins. And so then you actually need to not use moisturizer. And for certain people, not using moisturizer helps. So I'll just pause there because there's numerous factors that go into it. But I think honestly now some really helpful tools is testing. So getting a GI map done at least gives you a couple of things to start going after, or getting an organic acid test. That can be really helpful as well. The two together can kind of inform you of where to get started, especially with chronic eczema. But I'll tell you, things like allergy tests aren't really the first place I would start.
Interesting. And do you want to share a bit about where you are with coaching now and the really amazing body of knowledge that you've collected and you're sharing on your website, and what your thoughts are basically on that at this point?
Yeah, so I have spent so many years creating courses and digital products like ebooks. I built out a community, and at the moment, I am offering all of that as part of a free membership. I'm taking a step back away from actively coaching because it takes a pretty big toll on an empath, on somebody who has tried to heal their trauma in the middle of like a trauma healing journey. I have taken on so many people's pain for so long. For me in my healing journey, I'm taking a break from actively coaching, but I am allowing everyone free access to my courses. And my courses range from talking about stress to talking about how to reverse histamine intolerance, how to heal from candida overgrowth, what it looks like to heal the liver, some tips about TSW. So I wanted to offer that to the community for free while I'm taking a step back so that all of the knowledge that I have is just available. I didn't do all that for nothing. I wanted to help people. And so now I just want everyone to have all of my knowledge and just do with it what you will. And I hope that it helps people.
That is incredible. And I will definitely share the link to that as well when sharing this podcast. And I have to ask one more question.
Yeah.
So, if you were, let's say, addressing someone who has really severe chronic eczema, if you step aside for a moment from the reactions they might have from coming off a strong medication, like a more conventional, non-natural medication, what would you say is the key steps they can start to take to heal from your experience, from your personal experience, and what you've seen working for others? Like, what would you say would give someone like that hope? Like, that you can heal and you can get there.
It's something I haven't mentioned this entire time, but when somebody is at that such a chronic, severe state, leaning into your faith or a faith is really something that can be quite important. I think also looking at other people's stories, I'm a huge believer in mindset. And I have worked with so many people, and I see the mindset differences of people who are able to heal versus people who stay stuck. And I think shifting from a victim mindset to an abundant, empowered mindset is like one of the most important things, because that mindset allows you to shift your lifestyle, allows you to make those diet changes, allows you to take control and figure out what's working for your body. And I think that's my number one thing, is shifting your mindset, whether that's through faith, like I mentioned, like whether you're praying every day, whether you're meditating every day. It's really stepping away from the I am in such a miserable state, I'm never going to get better, into I'm going to do whatever it takes to heal. I think that's the number one thing.
I love it. And being open to, like you said, doing whatever it's going to take to heal, and being open to trying things, and that kind of positive perspective of I'm going to figure it out and I can do it versus I can't and this is awful and it's impossible. And that's a choice, right? I love it. I love that recommendation.
Oh, thanks. It's just, I have to say that because it's the thing I've seen across the board of people who have healed and people who are still stuck to this day.
It's almost like the predecessor to allow you to try whatever it is you have to try to change. Is you have to first choose you are going to change and you want to change and figure it all out. It's
Exactly.
great. Very wise. Thank you so, so much, Michelle, for coming on the podcast today. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to everything you've said because it was amazing. I really, really appreciate hearing your story. And I want to ask you so many more things. We'll have to chat offline. Thank you again so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be able to tell my story. It feels amazing to be, I'm at this change of my life of stepping away from coaching, of about to enter motherhood for a second child. And I think being able to just share my whole story from beginning to end is such a beautiful way of shifting into this new part of my life. So thank you for facilitating that.
Absolutely. And best of luck with everything about having your second baby. I hope it all goes smoothly and well.
Oh, thank you so much.